Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for watching this video. Okay, in this video, we are going to discuss some statistical concepts which are mostly applicable in psychological assessment. So please be reminded, so this video is not about statistics. It's not video about statistic as a course per se, but what are the application of statistics that we mostly use in psychological assessment. So as an overview, in this video lecture, we are going to discuss 5 subtopics. Okay, the first one, we are going to discuss about scale of measurement. Secondly, we are going to discuss how statistics used to describe data. And thirdly, we are going to discuss the most basic assumption in statistics, which is the normal curve. And next, we are going to discuss about the standard scores that we usually use to interpret psychological assessment results. And lastly, we are going to look at the statistical application that we can use to make inferences and do correlation. Okay, first, scale of measurement. So what is scale of measurement? So this scale of measurement is a combination of two words, which is scales and measurement. So by definition, measurement is the act of assigning numbers or assigning symbols to characteristic of things or characteristic of people, characteristic of events. In our case, the characteristic of psychological variables that we want to measure. So this assigning numbers is based on certain rules. Okay, the rules that we use in assigning numbers are the guidelines that help us to make an inferences about the magnitude of the psychological variables that we want to measure. Okay, in other words, so these guidelines are representing the magnitude or some other characteristic, the existence of the characteristic, for example, of the psychological variable, the object that being measured. Okay, if you want to make an analogy and an examples, attitude, for example, attitudes towards smoking. So it's a psychological variables which originally we do not have any value. Okay, we only have whether it's severe, strong attitudes, whether they have a positive attitudes, whether they have negative attitudes or no attitude at all. So in order for us to understand this magnitude, we assign numbers. Okay, so these numbers can be in the form of scales. Okay, like a scale, for example. So scale is a set of numbers or other symbols whose properties model empirical properties of the objects to which the numbers are assigned. Okay, what does this mean? Meaning that some subjective variables, for example, attitudes, so we cannot give them the magnitude of heavy, for example, or powerful, for example. So what we can give is subjective evaluative judgment. So this subjective evaluative judgment usually in the form of preferences, in the form of agreement. So that's why, okay, example here you use like scales. So we want to measure a psychological variable in the form of attitudes, okay. To measure this attitude, we assign numbers to the form of attitudinal reflections towards certain action or behavior. Okay, in this case, I give example of attitudes towards smoking. So if we want to know whether people have positive or negative attitudes towards smoking, so we assign Likert scale. So in each Likert scale, for example, here we use 5-point Likert scales. So we have from strongly disagree, disagree, okay, neutral or neither agree nor disagree, and agree and strongly agree. So from 1 to 5. So we are the one who assign this 1 to strongly disagree and 5 to strongly agree. So these rules, okay, 1 represent the least minimum or least existence of attitudes towards the object, in this case action, which is smoking. And 5, which is strongly agree, is the highest magnitude of that attitude. So in this case, we set the numbers. In other words, we set the rules. So these rules is the guideline for us to understand that 1 is the least existence of the attitude, while 5 is the strongest magnitude of the attitude in the person about a certain object or behavior, in this case about smoking, attitudes towards smoking. So this scale of measurement, we use it for most of us who want to operationalize psychological construct or psychological variable measurements. So we want to understand about attitude, we want to understand about personality, we want to understand about the existence of disorders, we want to know the trend, for examples. All of it we use scales of measurement. Okay, so we have to understand that in terms of scales, we have two types of scales. There are scales which we call as discrete variables, which we use only to name. Okay, we sometimes assign numbers to these, but these numbers does not give us any numeric value. Okay, but they are symbols that represent the name of that particular variables. Okay, so discrete variable employed to name or employed to categorize or basically just to count variables. Okay, example given here like gender, ethnicity, level of studies. Okay, so gender, when we want to key in, okay, we want to process the information, so we always assign 1 to male and 2 to female. So when we key in our system, so 1 represent male, 2 represent females, so 1 here does not represent a numeric value or quantitative value. It just for the sake of naming. 1 refer to male, 2 refer to females. Okay, sometimes this naming may be a little bit confusing. For example, level of study. Okay, because usually when we collect data among bachelor degree students, for example, so we want to know what are their level of study, whether they are first year, second year, third year, or fourth year. So we put there, they need to indicate what level of study they are currently in. So in this case, they might indicate, okay, they are first year students, level 1, second year student, level 2, third year student, level 3, and so forth. However, this level 1, level 2, or level 3, although it gives connotation of numbers, but the one that we key in is basically representing a symbols of naming these levels. Okay, it does not mean that it's a value by itself. Okay, it's a discrete variables. On the other hand, beside discrete variables, we also have continuous variables. So continuous variable refers to the values that can be any in real number in the scale sample space. Okay, examples here they give age, for example. So these continuous scales can even have fraction. Age cannot have, maybe the age can also have fractions. Okay, if they put there 35.2, maybe they are 35 years old and 2 months. Okay, but usually age we don't have this fraction. Okay, we have exact. Okay, how old are the person? So we ask them to write down. So this writing down their age, okay, represent a continuous variables. So continuous scale can have fraction or numbers with as many decimal as needed. Okay, so example here you can have anxiety, for example. Okay, if they score 10.2, okay, usually we take mean between, if the scale is 1 to 5, mean 4.2, 4.3, okay, 4.22, 4.25, for examples, how many decimal that can be. So continuous variables here is usually a score that are given, okay, a scale that are given to any psychological variables which we measure it continuously rather than categorically or just for the naming sake. Okay, these are the types of scale that we have in psychological measurement. It is not yet statistic, but it is important for us to understand that this scale of measurement are related to what analysis that we are going to use for the statistical analysis. Okay, another important thing is to understand the scale of measurement is level of measurement. And this is very important because sometimes when I look into research, I look into data collection, I look into data analysis. Sometimes researchers, which include us, psychologists, forget about level of measurement. So just now we discussed about types of skills, level of measurement importance, and sometimes this will dictate how we analyze the data, how we interpret the data, and to what extent that we can use certain statistical analysis depending on the level of measurement. Okay, so overall, there are 4 levels of measurements in psychological assessment. Okay, they are nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Okay, so this is arranged according to the lowest level of properties to the highest levels. Nominal scales. Okay, nominal scale is the simplest form of measurement. Okay, it's basically, so we use nominal scales just to classify or categorize the variables that we want to measure. So this classification or categorization based on one or more distinguishing characteristic. Okay, these characteristics measured must be placed into mutually exclusive categories or differences. Okay, they are exhaustive and they are distinguishable between one another. Okay, the most common one that people give example and the nominal scale is gender. Okay, so like I mentioned previously, when we want to analyze gender, okay, mostly researchers will only provide 2 categories, either male or female. We assign 1 to male and 2 to females. So these numbers, okay, is only nominal scales. It's just classification or for the sake of naming only. It does not carry any measurement properties that allow us to do further analysis. What we can do, we can identify the frequency, how many out of 100 participants are males, how many are females, and we can use percentages, okay, but we cannot do more inferential analysis when we use nominal scales. So most of the time when you do your data collection, especially in the demographic section, okay, most are nominal scales. Okay, most, okay, some might still be another type of another level of measurement. Okay, so this is the example. Okay, sometimes we ask about section, we ask about year of study. So just now I mentioned about gender, I mentioned about ethnicity, I mentioned about place. Okay, for example, state that you are staying. Okay, from sometimes we put there Kedah as 1, Perlis as 2, Penang as 3, and etc. So all of those, even we assign numbers, but the property of measurement, okay, the level of measurement is only classification for nominal scale. Okay, the second one is ordinal scales. Okay, ordinal scale is where people rank, okay, the score. So measurement in ordinal scales, we rank based on whatever category that we want to use. Okay, for example, high, low. We want to look at into who got the highest, who got the lowest, for example. So under no ordinal scales, 0 is without meaning. Okay, there is no meaning attached to 0. Okay, in ordinal scale, because the number of units that separate one test taker score from another is simply not known. Okay, we do not know the differences. So ordinal scales have no absolute 0 point. Okay, so basically, if they score 0, doesn't mean that the attitudes, the personality traits, okay, is not exist in the person. Okay, that's why I mentioned a 0 without meaning. So every test takers, regardless of standing on the test, is presumed to have some ability. Okay, no test taker is presumed to have 0 ability. Okay, sometimes, for example, if we develop an intelligence test, okay, IQ test, and then somehow a person got no correct answer. So we cannot claim that the person have zero IQ. Okay, he must have certain level, certain amount of IQ. However, the person did not manage to get a correct answer. So the score under ordinal scales, so we do not compute like use mean or etc. We just rank them. So the score are ranked, but the actual number of units separating one score from the next is not known. Okay, things like this. I always give examples about student performance in the class. Okay, previously teachers or even parents like to know what is the rank of their sons or children or the rank of their students. Okay, so in this case, say for example, we have 3 students. Okay, and among of the 3 who are got the highest, okay, or perform the best. Okay, say for example, person A. Okay, and then person C got the second best and person C got the third best. So if we look at here, so A is the best, C is the second place or second best, okay, and B is the last one. So in this case, if we look at in terms of the exact score, they might be totally different. Examples, for the best, okay, for person A, he got 90 out of 100. So he placed as the first place. But the second place got 60 out of 100. And the third place, the last one, only got 59 out of 100. So what is the meaning of rank? And the differences between rank is not known because we do not know actually when we rank, they are equal differences between first, second, and third. Okay, remember, for person A who scored the highest got 90 of 100, while people who score second got 60 out of 100. So the difference between the first place and the second place is 30 points. However, the difference between second place and the third place is 60 and 59. It's only 1 point. So this is what it means by there is no standing or known differences between rank. Okay. However, based on their performance, we can rank them who is first, who is second, and who are third. But the distance, the difference between the rank are not known. Whatever. Okay. In this case, the 0 in ordinal scale is also without meaning. Okay, so in this case, because there is no 0 point on an ordinal scale, the way in which data that we gather using ordinal scales from can be analyzed statistically are quite limited. Okay, why? Because there are no distance between exact distance between rank, and there are no values of 0, so it's quite limited in terms of type of analysis that we can do. Okay, for those who already learn statistics, so you might come across what we call parametric tests and non-parametric tests. So most of parametric tests where social scientists love to use, they depend on parametric tests. Okay, they prefer even to use parametric tests because for them it is more robust. Okay, robust here is technical term used for statistical analysis, whereby with slight changes, okay, identification of simple trend or slight trend can be identified by parametric tests. Okay, what is referred as robust. However, if scale is ordinal or categorical, okay, maybe 1 or 2 of the variables in the study are categorical, sometimes it limits, okay, the analysis that we can use. Okay, the researchers can only use non-parametric tests in this case. Okay, so this is an example whereby most of psychological research, okay, and most of psychological assessment love to use. Okay, I see myself as dependable, okay, self-discipline, and then respondents are required to answer from disagree strongly to agree strongly. Okay, if you look at here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 range of answer format. So this is basically a Likert scale. So Likert scale here, okay, please remember this. Likert scale here is ordinal scale. Okay, ordinal scales. Okay, like we discussed just now, When it's ordinal, okay, the numbers of statistical analysis that we can use are very limited. Okay, in this case, we can only rank them. So it basically we cannot do analysis item per item. Okay, so that's why I mentioned that just now when I at the beginning I mentioned that sometimes when I look into research, when I look into data analysis, I found that they are item level analysis. So when I look at the type of scale that they use, actually is ordinal scales. Okay, when ordinal scales, so you cannot use, for example, correlation or regressions in this example because they are ordinal scales. Okay, maybe if they use non-parametric test is okay. Okay, what we are allowed to do is actually related to interval scales, whereby instead of analyze item by item levels, we should look at the overall score for the whole scale. Okay, so this leads us to the discussion of interval scale. So what is interval scale? Interval scale have meaningful distances between numbers. Okay, remember when I give examples about the student performance, the 3 student performance in their class, who got the highest, who got the lowest. Okay, the difference between the first rank and the second rank is 30 points. Okay, the difference between the second and the third rank is only 1 point. Okay, so this shows that the differences between first, second, and third are not meaningful. Okay, the differences between 9. Okay, this is not for interval scales. So for interval scales, they have meaningful distances. So each unit on the scale is exactly equal to any other unit on the scales. Okay, so in here, if people if you can rank, for example, 1 is 90, okay, second is 80, and third is 70, and fourth is 60, okay, fifth is 50. Okay, so the differences are equal. Okay, 10 points, 10 points, and 10 points. So in this case, okay, for interval scales, because distance has a consistent meaning on interval scales, it is possible, okay, it allows us to add and subtract score, okay, which in this case allow us to do more statistical analysis. Why? Because when we are able to add, when we are able to subtract the score that we get, they will allow us to calculate the most important information for statistical analysis, which are means and standard deviation. So I'm not going to repeat what is standard deviation, what is mean here. You can refer to your notes in statistics. But like ordinal scales, interval scales contain no absolute 0 point. Okay, so in this case, for those who got the last ones, okay, for example, 0 out of 100 IQ test does not mean that they have no IQ at all. Okay, they have certain level of IQ, but it just turned out that they did not manage to get any correct answer in their score. Okay, why did I mention that ordinal scales in order for us? Because most of psychological measures, okay, psychological tools that we use in psychological assessment, they use ordinal scales. Okay, for example, I mentioned just now a Likert scale. But in order for us, okay, you read a lot of articles, okay, you come across a lot of instances where they use ordinal scales, okay, in this case Likert scale, but why they still use correlation? Why they still use t-test? Why they still use regression? Okay, this is the explanation. A well-designed test of ability test, okay, personality test, okay, psychopathology, okay, test for mental health, for examples, most of them consist of ordinal test item. Okay, like I mentioned, most of them are only ordinal level. So why they use inferential statistics and sometimes advanced statistical statistics. However, the test items are combined to produce a total score that behaves like an interval scale. Okay, it's a very important point. Okay, so here I mentioned just now I come across many cases when people use inferential statistical analysis at the item level, okay, while their item is only ordinal level. So it's not supposed to happen. Okay, why? Because statistically it not allow us to do any kind of advanced statistic, okay, in this case. So why they still use it? Okay, we are only allowed to use inferential statistic, for example, if we do not do the analysis at the item level. Okay, examples. You have attitude towards smoking skills. Okay, you have 10 items. So if they are ordinal levels, we should not analyze item 1, item 2, item 3. But what we can do is we total up all 10 items for all respondents, we get the mean, and we use the standard deviations for the analysis. So this standard deviation not for item by item, but the total score. So in this case, although all of these items are ordinals, okay, but they act like an interval property when we use total score rather than score for an item. Okay, those such psychological tests are not true interval scales. Okay, originally they are ordinal scales. For most purposes, they can be treated as intervals if we use the total score or the mean. Okay, out of all of the items. Okay, example are given here. For example, IQ score that we get from WAIS, okay, Western Adult Intelligence Skills, or any other standardized status score for intelligence-based testing, okay, such as SAT or GRE if you want to pursue your postgraduate study in the United States. Okay, the last one, which is the best, okay, if you can regard in that contain all of the properties, is ratio scale. Okay, though it's very limited, it's very hard to have a scale that have ratio property. Ratio, okay, in addition to all of properties of nominal, ordinal, and intervals, ratio scale has a true 0 point. Okay, so 0 under ratio scales have meanings, okay, which indicates that the absence of the thing being measured. Okay, for example, if we want to measure, okay, we ask people to indicate how many siblings you have. Okay, so one person put 5, one person put 2, and another put 0. So 0 here have meaning. What is the meaning? Meaning that he has no sibling or she has no siblings. So the ratio scale values represent the magnitude of the quantity being measured and can be compared as ratios and proportion. Okay, example here. It is possible that one person weighs twice as much as another person weighs, or that a person's income is 10% larger than it was in the previous year. Okay, so in this case, when we say that someone's weight double than I am, so if I am 100 kg, so the person is 200 kg. So why? Because they have absolute 0 meaning and the distance is equal. Okay, in this case, if you put that, okay, what is my income? So I said if 0 meaning I have no income. Okay, mistake that I committed when I fill in my tax form. We have to redo. Okay, that's an example such like. So here, okay, I said that okay, my income is 10% more than last year. So people can calculate directly. Okay, because it gives us absolute 0 meanings and it gives us a total flexible and total freedoms to calculate because it carries all of the properties. So this is the summary of the 4 levels of measurement. Okay, not including the type of scale, which is the discrete and continuous. So here you can see that the lowest level of measurement is nominal. Why? Because it only allows us to do one thing: naming or categorizing and label variables. Naming is label variables. Okay, on the other hand, if we are able to create or to have a ratio level of measurement for our psychological tools, okay, for our psychological test, it will allow us to do all of the analysis. Why? Because it contains all property of measurement. So what are the property of measurement? Categorizing and labeling, ranking, equal intervals, and true or meaningful zero. So ratio have all of these properties. Interval only have three, okay, categorizing and labeling, rank, and equal intervals, but do not have absolute zero meaning. Okay, ordinal only allow us to do two things, which is categorizing and labeling, and rank order. Okay, worst case scenario is nominal. Okay, it's not worst case scenario. It's the lowest level of measurement is nominal, where it allow us only to categorize and label. Okay, that's all for this first part, okay, on the level scales of measurement.